Are you ready for the unexpected? This, at first, may sound like an impossible question. How could you know if you're ready for the unexpected? Because by the very nature of the unexpected thing, it's unclear whether you're ready for it. There are some unexpected events that we simply can't prepare for, at least tactically speaking. We may be emotionally prepared for it, but we're not necessarily prepared to handle, for example, someone swerving into our lane on a 2-lane road. So, in today's episode, I want to talk about preparing for things that you can prepare for, but in a general way. If you think about preparation, very often we imagine that we should be preparing for specific events. And this is generally true. There are some specific events that are highly likely. For example, at some point, your current job situation will end. One way or another, you will stop working for whatever company you're working for right now. And that may happen today. It could happen next week. It could happen under your power or not. But we can prepare for that eventuality in multiple ways. But today I want to focus on preparing for events that are harder to say with certainty will occur. And we do this by creating resilience in our systems and in our careers and our lives. So I want to give you 3 practical kind of principles of preparedness for your life and for your career. The first principle is build for change. You can't predict the future. You can't predict what specific things will happen, but you can prepare for many futures by preparing for change. Think about it like this. The primary areas of your life, the key factors, the key realities of your position in your role, or the key realities of where you live. Think about these, list, a handful of facts about your life and imagine what if each of those change. If you're building for change, how can you do that? How can you build for change? A couple of things that you might consider doing. The first is invest in optionality. Invest in optionality. There are many options. You might consider these kind of like trailheads. The options that you may choose in the future. And investing in options, and just to be clear, we're not talking about stock options here, but investing in options gives you the opportunity in the future to change a little bit easier. So, for example, maintaining your professional network. This is a type of investment in potential options. By having many relationships that you continue to cultivate over time, you have many opportunities in the future to talk to those people if and when you need to. Whether that is in order to hire somebody, or if you're searching for a job yourself, or maybe you're just seeking out advice, maybe you're looking for a mentor. If you do not cultivate these relationships, the cost of building a brand new relationship cold is much higher than maintaining your options. So the idea here, and the thing I want you to take away from this point, is that you should be investing in low cost, high upside options. Low cost, low investment, right? It's not going to take up all your time. It's not going to take up all of your energy. Investing in options is about flexibility. This is not going to have an immediate return for you, most likely. But your optionality does change the way you make decisions today. For example, let's imagine that you have 3 offers sitting on your table during a job search. This improves not only your optionality in order to optimize your selection. In other words, you can compare and contrast these and choose the one that you like the most. but it also improves your negotiation position and your psychological position. The negotiation position is improved by the fact that you have an offer to leverage against another. And you can do this safely and without violating most ethical principles. The psychological upside is that saying no to one doesn't reduce you to zero. In other words, you have fallback offers. Of course, this is improved if all three of the offers are reasonably good. You don't want to trick yourself into believing, and this goes for all of your options, that you have options that you don't actually want or care about. The bad options may trick you into a false sense of security initially, and then when the rubber meets the road, you don't really want to choose that option even though it's available to you. So the idea here is to invest in low-cost, high-upside options. Again, investing in keeping your relationships with your professional network going is very likely a low cost, right? This is as simple as reaching out and saying hello to a round of people, 10, 20, 30 people that you've been in touch with in your career, making sure that you're keeping those relationships up, congratulating them if you see things on LinkedIn. This is very simple. We're not going to, necessarily change the world of networking here on this podcast, but the very small amount of investment that you keep going with these people to keep your name in mind, the potential upside for you could be a new job. The potential upside for you could be a new connection that leads to a major breakthrough in your career or in your personal life. So this is a very simple, a very low-cost investment, right? There's a lot of other low-cost investments. One that I like to cite is reading books or buying books. Books they tend to be somewhere between $6, $7 and $30 at the most. And there are some books that have changed my entire life. Now, I don't know of many other $30 investments that would have such a large impact on my life. It's a one-time investment, and then, of course, the time that it takes to read the book or listen to it on Audible or whatever your audiobook provider is. This is a massive upside for such a small investment. I like to imagine that this podcast is representative of another low-cost investment for you, and the potential upside, if even one thing sticks with you in this podcast, if it has an impact on your career, then the 10 or 15 minutes that you chose to spend listening to this episode is worth it 10 times over. All right, so try to find those kinds of options to invest in. The second principle is to understand the weak parts of your current system. Understand the weak parts of your current system. And when I say system here, I might be talking about your career. I might be talking about your personal life. Maybe your finances would come into play here. Maybe it's things that are outside of your control, like, for example, situations that are above your level in your company, or potentially political situations wherever you live. There's a lot of things that could fit into this category, and understanding what they are can do two things. One, if you have no control over it, then you can start creating mitigation plans around it, right? So the idea is that you can kind of trace these risks and determine what happens if and when this risk becomes a real problem for me. When something actually happens and I realize the risk. What can I do? What are some ways to absorb that risk? If you do have some control over the risk factor, then mitigating the risk directly. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the first concept, the idea of building for change. If you, for example, you may have a single option today. Maybe you have one income. Right? This is a good example. And your single income represents a risk, especially depending on your standing at work. Right? You can kind of keep a temperature on what level of risk does that represent for you. Now, you might be used to people on podcasts telling you that you need to get multiple streams of income, which is one way that you can mitigate a risk like having a single income and potentially, not being able to pay your bills or not being able to retire or something like that if that income goes away. But there are other routes. For example, it's likely that if you were to lose your job, there's some amount of time that it would take for you to gain a new job. Most people who listen to this podcast, most people in the engineering industry, at some point, you would be able to find your next role. And so perhaps the risk mitigation is to have some kind of runway, have some kind of savings account that you've built up. Now, this doesn't come for free. Most risk mitigation doesn't, but there may also be low-hanging fruit for you to have a way forward. Again, if you look at some of those options that you're investing in the first principle, then you may be relieving some of the risk or at least changing the risk profile that you find in the second principle, understanding where your weak points actually are. The third principle is one that you may have kind of picked up on as I was talking through the last two principles. The third principle is to think like an engineer. And hopefully this will come a little bit more natural to those of you listening to this podcast. The idea of thinking like an engineer when it comes to your personal risk profile, whether it's in your career, your personal life, maybe you're applying this to your job, then thinking like an engineer makes the most sense in that situation. The idea is that if you are approaching the problem like an engineer would, then you are looking for things like bottlenecks or single points of failure. You're looking for pressure testing opportunities. If you imagine the full landscape of your life and apply something like chaos engineering to it, say, for example, you suddenly lost your transportation. Maybe your car gets totaled. This is a very simple kind of mental exercise, right? So what you're doing is you're applying the same kinds of techniques that you would in hardening a system. You might ask questions like, are you resilient to interruption? And it's important for you to think about the many different types of resources that could come under pressure. For example, the relational resources in your life may come under pressure. The monetary resources, perhaps your own physical resources, your health could come under pressure. There are so many different ways to think about risk, and your job as your kind of self-life engineer is to try to find ways to limit the risk in certain areas, and most importantly, to take advantage of opportunities in other areas. This is where that investment in options comes into play. When you have a litany of options in front of you and you've taken good care to reduce your risks in other areas, then the options become new pathways. These are the opportunity for you to make a decision that doesn't just reduce risk, right? That's reducing risk will only get you so far. In order for your career to grow and to flourish, in order for you to kind of meet goals that you care about, growth goals, etc., in your personal life, it is likely that you need to seize opportunity. And seizing opportunity is made possible. It's made safe and reliable by mitigating risk. So I'd encourage you to look into these three principles, this kind of principled approach of seeking options, trying to understand what your weak points are early on, and to approach that problem like an engineer, to think analytically about the different resources that could fail and the failure modes that you're not far away from. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode of Developer Tea. Hopefully this was a useful discussion for you. I encourage you to go and put some of these thoughts into action today. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, enjoy your tea.